Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word, into a video that's probably going to get just a little bit ranty, just a tiny bit ranty at times. That was a little bit squeaky as well. But yeah, it is of course F1's hot topic at the moment, and that is engine penalties. And after the farcical Monza weekend, it's definitely something that's got me riled up good and proper, as it has a lot of F1 fans. A total of 145 penalties were applied over the Italian Grand Prix weekend, and there are only 20 drivers on the grid. That is absolutely ridiculous. 145 penalty places in total. That is just so flipping stupid. I have put together a graphic because I love to torture myself. On screen now, we have got the official qualifying classification, where they originally qualified, and the number of penalty places they received. I'm not going to go through all of them, guys. I'm just going to pick out a few of my favourites for you. Now, Alonso, he received a 35 place grid penalty, originally qualified 13th and started 19th. That's completely fair there. He got the most. Starts lower down. Grosjean there, DNQ'd officially because he was outside the 107% rule, but did get permission from the stewards to race, as we know. Jolyon Palmer, he qualified 17th. He started 17th and received a 15 place grid penalty. Carlos Sainz, he qualified 15th and started 15th and received a 10 place grid penalty. My absolute favourite though is Sergio Perez. He originally qualified 11th. He started a position higher in 10th, but took a 5 place grid penalty. Work that out. Seriously, guys, it just is absolutely ludicrous. Even to the point where you look at Daniel Kvyat and Kevin Magnussen. Kevin Magnussen in particular went out in Q1, qualifying 16th, but started 9th. Seriously, it is so stupid. I just cannot get my head around who thought this was a good idea. There were fans sat in the grandstand for 3 or 4 hours in the teeming rain waiting for qualifying to finish. There were people sat at home suffering through David Croft's talking. Oh, Jesus. On Sky Sports F1, 4 hours of that waiting for qualifying to be done, only to wake up Sunday morning and find out that qualifying was completely irrelevant because the grid was not what it finished as. It is absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense, and it properly boils my blood. I went with blood there. I could have swore, but I didn't. Absolutely infuriating. It really is. As an F1 fan, I love the old days, really. I'd rather see that back. Driver goes out, 1 hour, 12 laps, including in and out laps, to set your fastest time. Whoever sets the fastest time starts pole, and whoever sets the slowest time starts last. That is crazy talk. Absolutely crazy talk. Modern day F1 will just not have that. Lewis Hamilton, he did qualify pole and did start pole. By the way, I'm taking nothing away from Lance Stroll and Esteban Ocon. Even if they started 4th and 5th, that is still a fantastic qualifying for them. But it is just an absolute joke, and it's everyone's laughing at F1 at the minute. It is just in such a mess. The problem is, though, and I'm going to say something here that I don't often say, I actually kind of agree a little bit with Jean Todt, the FIA president, when he said that it's not the ideal solution, but there isn't really a solution that solves all problems. And he's actually kind of right, because even when you come up with your solutions, and I've come up with 4, which we're going to go through in a minute, there are problems with those as well. And they do throw up big questions and are going to cause other issues around the sport. Let's have a look at them, actually. We'll do that now. So the 4 I've come up with are a deduction of constructors' points, a fine percentage of the prize money, so a percentage of whatever they get at the end of the season for their championship finishing position is a penalty. That was a mouthful. And no penalties at all. Just throw them all out the window and let teams do what they want. So we'll start off with the constructors' points, then deducting those from a team. It would mean that the teams would face the penalty and not the drivers. I kind of feel that's the fairest one, because drivers aren't really in control of engine development and reliability. Yes, they can look after an engine, but they're not responsible for making sure it's reliable. So I think that's the fairest one. It doesn't effectively really affect the racing, because what ends up happening is people qualify and they start where they qualify, and we get, drivers on the grid where they should be. How great would that race have been with Verstappen second and Daniel Ricciardo third? They were quicker than Ferrari. They could have taken the fight to at least Bottas over the weekend, and we might have got something to talk about. Although we did get a great drive back through the field from both of them, but it would have been great to see them challenging at the front, because that's where we want the best drivers. It's as simple as that. The problems with this, though, is it's a team sport, and there is the definite theory that you win together and you lose together as a team. So, if you start taking constructors' points off a team because the engine failed, then do you give constructors' points back to the team when a driver who's leading puts it in the wall? That's the argument that teams will throw at you. I think that's a bit stupid in some respects. That'll never happen, but teams will argue that, and I get that. But I think it's the fairest one in my opinion. I really do. It does throw up another issue, which in theory and on paper, Sauber, for example, they're last in the championship. They're not really going to face too much of a deduction, are they? They've only got 5 points, so once they've lost them, that's it. They could change their engines willy-nilly, still finish last. It'll make no difference to them. I know they've not got the budget to do it, and it's never going to happen, but in theory, it could happen. McLaren, for example, they're not that much further ahead of Sauber. They could do that, change their engine left, right, and centre, and that's going to put costs up as well. So as unlikely as that is to happen, it is something that could happen, and that'll concern the FIA, and it's not really the way forward in that respect, but I just think it is the best way forward. A fine, I don't like it. I don't like the idea of a fine. It does discourage teams from changing engines too often, and it'll make sure that the team get the penalty rather than driver, and again, it wouldn't have a direct implication on the racing. The problem is then, if you've got your rich teams who won't care about the fine because they can afford to pay it. You've got poorer teams struggling to pay that fine and struggling to keep up, and that's going to make the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and ultimately the performance gap, even wider. And it kind of cancels out as well the cost-saving idea behind engine restrictions in the first place. They bring engine restrictions in to bring the cost down, then fine a team anyway. So it kind of, it's not ideal. I don't like that one. I'm also not keen of the percentage fine as well. I've read that on Twitter. A few people saying, deduct a percentage of their championship points so that the smaller teams can afford it better than the bigger teams, which kind of makes sense. We'll keep it nice and simple because I am crap at maths. Mercedes get £100 for winning the World Championship. Sauber get £1 for finishing last. That would mean a 10% penalty, for example, would be a £10 fine for Mercedes, but only a 10p fine for Sauber. And that isn't really fair in terms of, let's say, fair play. Ultimately, it's maybe a way to control it without affecting the championship positions. But then are we going to end up in a position again where that gap's going to get bigger? Mercedes is going to say, well, if I'm only getting charged a tenner to change my engine, 10% of me winnings, I may as well just change it. Ferrari, they say they do value the Constructors' Championship, but they don't really need the money. They've got their road car business propping them up. Red Bull, they're in a really good position financially. McLaren have got Honda paying them 50 million a year just to run the engine. So, it's a difficult one. It would again, for me, see smaller teams suffer more than the bigger teams, and we don't want to lose teams from the grid because it could happen. The other one is to get rid of these grid penalties altogether, and the pros for that, there are so many pros. You get no more ridiculous grid penalties. That's going to lead to less confusion for the fans, will ultimately lead to better racing. It would enable teams to push harder in races because they don't have to look after the engine. They'll have more powerful engines because they won't have to be as reliable, so they can pump all the effort into power. If they do blow up, change them for the next race. No fine, no penalty, no problem. Racing's so much better on track. However, the big problems. Costs would go absolutely through the roof. They would soar, spiral out of control, just like they were doing in F1 at one point. Rich teams could afford to change their engine 2 or 3 times a weekend with no problems. That's going to help their performance out. The poorer teams will try and keep up with that, but they can't do it. That's going to grow that gap again that we were talking about before, about the performance gap, the financial gap, the haves and the have-nots. It's going to rip the sport to pieces in that respect because teams can't afford to do that anymore, and we will end up in a position where, looking at it realistically, Sauber and Haas, you'd probably lose within 2 seasons, and possibly Force India not long after that. And the problem with that is we lose 3 teams from the grid, but future manufacturers and future teams will look at the sport and go, we're not coming in with costs that high, and we're not going to get those teams replaced. So we end up with, 7 teams on the grid? It's not looking good at that point if they were to go down that route. I mean, look at what happened with, what were they then? HRT, Virgin and Lotus in 2010. They came into the sport on this promise from the FIA and from F1 that the costs were going to come down. They may even cap them. They'll be able to compete. They'll be able to survive. It never happened, and they've all gone now, which is really, really sad. But there you go. That is the way Formula 1 was then, and it's just a way it can't go. It just can't go down that route. I keep looking at it going, it'd be great, wouldn't it? Better racing, faster cars, more power in the engines, not having to worry about changing, no stupid grid penalties. But I would rather have more teams on the grid and have to have some sort of penalty than less teams on the grid and no penalty. So there you go. For me, that's not going to work. Like I say, the best one probably on paper is the constructors' points. Yes, teams aren't going to like it, but it wouldn't be a huge penalty. Maybe a point per component over their limit they change, So for some teams, that might only be Mercedes, for example, that might only be 10 points over the course of a season. For McLaren, it would probably be 3,742. Something stupid like that. That was a really random number. But yeah, that kind of would be the big difference, is who would get punished the most. Sauber, for example, they'd have a more powerful engine for Ferrari next year, and therefore more reliable and up-to-date spec engine, so they wouldn't have to suffer so much. Force India would have the Mercedes engine. It would only really be the Honda and Renault teams, whoever they will be next year, we'll leave it at that would suffer really with that penalty massively. So it could work. It's probably the best and fairest way forward for me. I think the other options, again, they're just going to take too much away from teams, and they're going to cause too many problems and possibly put teams in jeopardy as well. So not a great option in those 3, but I understand what people are saying with them, and they kind of make sense when you look at the pros, but the cons for me are way too great in those. And hopefully if they get rid of the grid penalties, that's going to make the sport more appealing and draw people in, new fans, and keep old fans interested. There are a lot of people out there who have been lifelong F1 fans who are cancelling Sky subscriptions and not bothering to watch the race outside of Channel 4 because it's not worth the money they're paying for it. And I totally get that. And with the sport, of course, moving completely behind the paywall at the end of 2019, people aren't going to be able to watch it for free. I know Liberty Media have already said that they want to get that changed and get it back on free-to-air TV, which is vital to them. And I hope they do. I really hope they do. And I have no doubt that Liberty Media are going to change some stuff in this sport for the better. I have no doubt they will turn certain things around. The problem is when you listen to them and and you listen to Jean Todt and the FIA and you read some stuff, it to me feels as though you've got the FIA wanting to go one way, Liberty Media wanting to go another, and you've got this mishmash in the middle that is the current Formula One. And it's not good enough, and it's not worth paying an absolute fortune for every month. It really isn't. But at the moment, it's definitely a sport in decline, and it's something that needs to be sorted out very, very quickly. It is sad. It is really, really sad to see, but hopefully people are going to get their heads together and come up with something that's actually going to work. Get rid of the penalty system, make the sport less confusing, effectively, you know, a bit less confusing for new fans in particular, but old fans as well. Consistency, a big word that I use very, very often about Formula One. A bit more consistency in decision making. That would make a difference, cutting the cost, making the field more exciting, bringing it closer together, more exciting, closer racing. That's what we want. They need to be changing these things, and they need to be doing it quickly, because Formula One is definitely in decline, and it needs to be turned around as quickly as possible. And it is sad to watch, in my opinion. It is really sad to see it in such a mess at the moment. Hopefully it will get there though. And that's just a happy note to end on, guys, there. I thought I'd leave you with that cheery note just before the weekend. I will be back very, very soon, of course, with another video. F1 itself is back next weekend. They are in Singapore. Hopefully by then as well, we're going to know who McLaren will be using as an engine supply next year. At the moment, at the time of recording, they are still officially with Honda, although we're expecting that to change, but I'll go into that and give my opinion on that as soon as that is announced, guys. But as ever, thank you so much for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.